The Smiley Face Killers, a nationwide conspiracy or urban legend. Since the late 1990s, a chilling mystery has gripped America. Over 45 young men, mostly college-aged, have mysteriously drowned in rivers and lakes across the country. In many of these cases, a simple yet ominous symbol, a smiley face, has been found spray-painted nearby. Is this just a coincidence, or could it be the work of a secret group of killers? A shadowy network operating under the radar, choosing their targets with deadly precision. Today we delve into the controversial and perplexing theory of the Smiley Face Killers. What is the Smiley Face Killers theory? The Smiley Face Killers theory was first proposed in the early 2000s by two retired New York City detectives, Gannon and Anthony Duarte. Their work began with a single case, the death of Patrick McNeil in 1997, but soon they began to notice a pattern, a disturbing sequence of similar deaths across multiple states. These were not random drownings, they believed, but the work of a coordinated group of killers. Gannon and Duarte, armed with years of investigative experience, began to connect the dots between multiple drowning cases that had been officially ruled as accidental or undetermined. The victims shared common traits. They were all young men, college students, often athletic or academically successful, and in most cases they vanished after a night out drinking. But there was something else, something much darker. Near many of these drowning sites, Gannon and Duarte found something strange, a smiley face graffiti painted nearby. To some it was just a coincidence, a common graffiti tag found everywhere in urban areas, but to Gannon and Duarte it was a signature, a calling card left by the killers. Could this symbol really be the mark of a shadowy network of killers? And if so, what could their motive be? Expanding section of the origin of the theory and the detective's quest for answers. To understand the origins of the Smiley Face Killers theory, we need to look at the careers and motivations of its primary proponents, Gannon and Anthony Duarte. Both were seasoned detectives with extensive experience investigating homicides and missing persons in New York City. But what drove them to pursue this theory, and why have they dedicated nearly 2 decades of their lives to uncovering what they believe is a nationwide conspiracy? Gannon and Duarte first became involved after the death of Patrick McNeil, a promising college student from Fordham University who disappeared in 1997. After a night out with friends at a bar in Manhattan, McNeil was last seen staggering down a street, followed by a van that seemed to be tailing him. His body was discovered 2 months later, miles away in the East River. Gannon was struck by several details that didn't fit with an accidental drowning. McNeil was found face up in the water, which is rare for drowning victims. His body showed signs of being held or tied, and there were unexplained burns on his torso. Gannon was convinced that McNeil was murdered, but the case was closed as an accidental drowning. This drove him to dig deeper. As he looked into other similar cases, he began to see a disturbing pattern emerge. The key cases, tragic deaths across the United States. Let's take a closer look at some of the key cases that Gannon and Duarte believe are linked. Each case involves a young man, often an athlete or an academically successful student, who disappears after a night of drinking. Their bodies are found later in rivers or lakes, sometimes miles from where they were last seen. One of the most notable cases is that of Chris Jenkins, a 21-year-old University of Minnesota student who vanished on Halloween night in 2002. 4 months later, his body was found in the Mississippi River, still wearing his Halloween costume. Initially, his death was ruled an accidental drowning, but after pressure from his family, the case was reopened and reclassified as a homicide. Jenkins's case had several anomalies. Witnesses reported seeing him being ejected from a bar by bouncers, and his hands were found in a prayer-like position, which is highly unusual for a drowning victim. His autopsy also suggested that he may have been held captive for some time before his death. But Jenkins was not the only one. Dakota James, a 23-year-old Duquesne University graduate student, went missing in Pittsburgh in January 2017. He was last seen on surveillance footage walking towards the river, but his movements were erratic. 40 days later, His body was discovered miles downstream and his death was ruled accidental, but Gannon and Duarte believe otherwise. In many of these cases, there were additional unexplained factors, like missing clothing, injuries inconsistent with drowning, and bodies found in positions that defied normal patterns. And then there were the smiley faces. Analysis of key cases. To truly understand the scope of this theory, we need to go beyond the headlines and examine each case in detail. Let's start with a deeper look at some of the key cases that have fueled the Smiley Face Killers theory, beginning with Patrick McNeil. McNeil was a good student, an aspiring psychologist, and had no known enemies. The circumstances of his disappearance raised several red flags. He was last seen by friends leaving a bar, but witnesses reported a suspicious van following him. When his body was finally discovered, it showed signs of trauma that did not fit with a simple drowning. Could he have been abducted and held captive, as Gannon and Duarte suggest? Gannon's investigation into McNeil's death led him to other cases, like that of Todd Geib, a 22-year-old from Michigan who disappeared after attending a party in 2005. Geib's body was found in a private lake 21 days later, floating upright in what is known as the dead man's float. His death was ruled an accidental drowning, but there were inconsistencies. His body was remarkably well preserved for having been in the water for 3 weeks, suggesting he may not have been in the lake for the entire duration. Geib's phone was found near the lake with mysterious outgoing calls made to his voicemail in the hours after he was last seen. Could this suggest he was alive for some time after his disappearance and that someone else was in possession of his phone? And then there's William Hurley, a 24-year-old Navy veteran who disappeared in Boston in 2009. Hurley called his girlfriend for a ride home from a Boston Bruins game, telling her his phone was dying. Moments later, he vanished. His body was found in the Charles River 6 days later, but his cell phone was missing and his body showed signs of blunt force trauma, inconsistent with a fall or drowning. Again, Gannon and Duarte pointed to a smiley face graffiti found near the spot where his body was recovered. Was it a clue, a coincidence, or a chilling signature left by a killer? The pattern and the profile. Is there a method to the madness? As we piece together these cases, a pattern begins to emerge. Gannon and Duarte believe that the killers are targeting a specific type of victim. Young, healthy, white males, often athletes or scholars with no history of mental illness or substance abuse. They are in many ways the kind of young men society holds up as examples of success and promise. The detectives argue that this isn't random, it's deliberate. They believe the killers are selecting victims who fit a particular profile, then using advanced surveillance techniques to track them. The victims are often abducted after a night of drinking, when they are most vulnerable, and then disposed of in bodies of water to make the deaths appear accidental. But why this particular profile, and what could be the motive? Psychological profile and motive. To understand the possible motive behind the Smiley Face Killers theory, we must delve into the psychology of criminal behavior. If this theory is true, what could drive a group of individuals to commit such carefully orchestrated murders? Many experts believe that the targeting of young, successful men could suggest a desire to destroy what they cannot achieve, a resentment or hatred of a particular type of individual. It could also be driven by a thrill-seeking impulse, a need to engage in a deadly cat-and-mouse game with law enforcement and the public. The use of the smiley face, a symbol that typically represents happiness, takes on a much darker meaning in this context. Could it be a way for the killers to mock their victims, their families, and the investigators, to flaunt their perceived superiority and control over life and death? The evidence? What do we really know? To validate the Smiley Face Killers theory, Gannon and Duarte have presented several pieces of evidence they believe point to foul play. Let's take a closer look at what they've uncovered. They claim that in many cases, the bodies showed signs of being held in captivity before being placed in the water. There are anomalies like decomposition rates that suggest the bodies were not in the water for as long as they were missing. For example, several victims were found with ligature marks suggesting they may have been bound. Others had head injuries inconsistent with falling or accidental drowning. But what about the smiley face graffiti? Gannon and Duarte have documented over a dozen instances where a smiley face was found near the body recovery sites. They argue this is not a coincidence but a deliberate signature, a taunt left by the killers. However, many skeptics argue that smiley faces are among the most common forms of graffiti in the world. Could Gannon and Duarte be seeing patterns where there are none? Not everyone is convinced by the Smiley Face Killers theory. Many law enforcement officials, criminologists, and forensic experts argue that the evidence is far from conclusive. Skeptics argue that young men, particularly those who have been drinking, are statistically more likely to have accidents near water. They point out that drowning is the third leading cause of unintentional injury death worldwide, particularly for males aged 15 to 29. Many also argue that the cases cited by Gannon and Duarte have been thoroughly investigated by local law enforcement and ruled accidental. They see the detectives' claims of cover-ups and conspiracies as speculative, based more on intuition than hard evidence. There's no denying that these deaths are tragic, but without solid evidence linking them together, the idea of a serial killer network remains a theory, not a fact. To better understand the skepticism surrounding the Smiley Face Killers theory, it's important to explore the common criticisms of this idea. First, there is the statistical argument. Drownings are not uncommon, particularly among young men who are more likely to engage in risky behavior, especially when alcohol is involved. Critics also point out that the smiley face symbol is among the most ubiquitous forms of graffiti, found in cities and towns worldwide. Could it simply be that the symbol's presence near these crime scenes is coincidental, a reflection of its general popularity rather than a deliberate signature? Furthermore, many of the so-called anomalies, such as ligature marks or decomposition rates, could have multiple explanations unrelated to foul play. Hypothermia, for example, can cause certain injuries or behaviors that might mimic signs of assault. With these points in mind, it's clear that the theory, while intriguing, faces significant hurdles when examined under scientific scrutiny. For the families of the victims, the Smiley Face Killers theory offers a glimmer of hope for answers in the face of an unimaginable loss. Many have refused to accept the official rulings of accidental death and believe there is more to these drownings than meets the eye. These families have criticized law enforcement for what they see as a rush to judgment, and some have taken matters into their own hands by hiring private investigators or turning to the media to keep their cases in the public eye. But is this search for answers helping to uncover the truth? Or is it unintentionally fueling a conspiracy theory that lacks concrete evidence? So, where does that leave us? Is there really a secret network of killers out there targeting young men across the country? Or are these cases just tragic accidents that happen to share some eerie similarities? While the Smiley Face Killers theory has captured the public imagination, it remains just that, a theory, one that lacks definitive proof. But the deaths of these young men are real, and the questions surrounding them are no less compelling. What do you think? Are these cases connected, or is the Smiley Face Killers theory just another urban legend? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button and subscribe to Into the Odd for more deep dives into the world's most chilling mysteries. If you're fascinated by unsolved mysteries, true crime theories, and the unknown, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have many more stories to explore, and we want you to join us for every journey. Whether it's a conspiracy or a series of tragic coincidences, the Smiley Face Killers theory reminds us that the world is full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered, if we dare to look.